I'm so cold. So very, very cold. There is no more warmth left in this room. 2 weeks ago, it started. Back when I could still see the sun. I live alone. My parents kicked me out after I dropped out of high school. I always hated school. The teachers, the kids, all of them. They don't understand you, and they say they do, and sometimes it seems like they actually do. But it's all false. And so-called friends, they're just people who act like they care, but turn around to stab you in the back as soon as it benefits them. As you can tell, I'm not a people person. Maybe it wasn't their fault though, considering my sickness. I always forget to mention that part. I have serious mental problems. As far back as I can remember, I get these images in my head, terrible, awful images. Visions of murder, rape, sickness, and war. But it's worse than just images. I feel them. It's like I was there, experiencing them firsthand. From what I've been told by people around me when I've had my episodes, mostly teachers, I spasm and throw myself to the floor, scratching and writhing at everything around me, screaming all the while. Of course, I don't remember it. All I remember is the images, and I doubt I will ever be rid of them. These teachers, these idiots, thought I was merely acting out, seeking attention as it were, as did my classmates. I hated them and they hated me, leading to many fights at school. I even sent a few kids into the hospital. One hell of a childhood. I live in a dingy rental home in the slums of an unimportant city. My parents don't visit me anymore, and none of my neighbors can stand being around me for more than a few minutes. Nobody ever cared about me, and nobody ever will. And I'm content with that. It was only last month when I saw a doctor about my episodes. He diagnosed me with a wide array of mental disorders, none of which I bothered to ask what they meant. All I knew was that I needed pills, and he could give me some. I remember him prescribing me 3 or 4 different medications, but I didn't take them right away. I waited, thinking maybe, just maybe, the images were caused by a troubled childhood, and maybe I had matured out of it. But sure enough, a few days later, they came back. Suicide, bombs ripping people apart, and genocide. My mind was filled to the brim with these images, and they were some of the worst yet. I was already sobbing in the fetal position by the time my mind comprehended that I might be able to stop this. I couldn't open my eyes. I didn't want to see anymore. I remember crawling on my side towards the bathroom, trembling while trying to stand up and throwing open my medicine cabinet, spilling the assorted products on the floor. I felt around blindly for the unfamiliar shape of pill bottles, and soon found them. I ripped them open and threw them into my mouth, many of them falling onto the floor. I collapsed onto the cold tile, losing consciousness. This was a first. Then, I woke up in my bed. I must have become stable enough to get in bed at some point. I just didn't remember it. Maybe. Then it began. I was cold. With my heavy comforter, one of the few things I was able to afford, it should have kept me warm. Even on the coldest nights here, I could always take solace in sleep. I got up and walked into the living room and turned on my TV. Cable was out. Should have known. How long had it been since I paid my bills? Still cold, I thought to myself. I walked over to the thermostat and cranked it up. I didn't bother checking the temperature. Hearing that old familiar sound of the heater pumping warm air gave me a bit of rejoice. I sat back down. But 15 minutes went by, and I was still cold. I walked over to the heat vent, placing my hand over it. I couldn't feel any warmth. I couldn't feel any air coming from the vent. But I could definitely hear it. My bills, of course. No wonder there was no heat. I could only feel the cold grate of the vent. But then why could I hear it pumping throughout the room? Might as well call my landlord, I thought to myself, picking up the phone. Dead. Doesn't anything in this fucking place work? I distinctly remember asking myself. It was one of the last things I remember saying out loud. How was I to know what was happening? I walked outside. I don't remember if it was to grab the morning paper or perhaps to soak up some rays of the sun. But it was at this time I knew something was wrong. It was dead outside. And I'm talking Sunday morning in the winter at 4 a.m. dead. There was no lights on in any of the houses. Nobody walking outside, no noise. The silence was making my ears ring. I slowly walked back in, afraid to disrupt the stillness by too loud of a step. At the time I hadn't realized it was much colder outside than in. The rest of the day went per usual, watching DVDs for hours and reading. Only difference was the cold, which by my best efforts I could not stop. Then I went to bed, one of my last moments of peace, even though there was no warmth to be had. The next morning I woke up against the blaring noise of my alarm clock. Work? No, much too cold. I put my hand on the dresser to turn the alarm clock off. When I felt it, searing pain in my hand. My palm lurched off the dresser, bits of flesh ripping off. Cradling my hand under my armpit for warmth, I looked at the dresser. It was covered in a fine layer of frost. No, it wasn't frost. It was too perfect. It was ice, perfectly clear and smooth like glass, and nearly covering the entire dresser. Little bits of my skin and flesh were on the top, and a small amount of warm blood dripped from my palm. Even that small amount of warmth made me shiver. I had been so used to the cold of my house. Obviously, I was disturbed. I don't remember spilling a glass of water. No, I definitely hadn't. I walked out of my room and went to check outside. Maybe I could casually talk to one of my neighbors about the cold. Who was I kidding? They'd probably think I'm dicking around, trying to screw with them. Still, I needed to know why it was so cold. I placed my hand on the knob and jumped back. Frozen. I grabbed my comforter and gripped the knob, twisting with all my might. Nothing, not a budge. I threw myself against the door, trying to force it open. Luckily, my poor run-down house was flimsy. It flew open, and I stumbled outside. Then I realized I couldn't move. My right shoe, the only one touching the sidewalk, was frozen to the ground. I could hear the sound of the ice forming the outline of my footprint along the ground. Alarmed, I pulled away with as much strength as I could muster in this tundra, barely ripping my foot free, and fell back inside. There was no wind, and yet the outside brought the ghastly cold into my house. Even the icy temperature of my house was better than the feeling of cold death outside. I stood up and slammed the door shut, leaving my shoe. Since then, every day has been constant torment. The cold is unbearable. Every day, a little bit more of my house is covered with that perfect, glassy ice. Less and less of my few commodities I can use. My bed froze solid 2 days ago. I've resorted to sleeping in the corner of my living room. But soon that wore thin, as my TV, couch, and walls were covered in ice. I didn't eat for the first few days, terrified. Soon enough, though, I realized I needed something, anything to keep my body warm. So I ran to my fridge. I opened and felt like a complete fool. How could any of my food be edible? A fridge storing food at cold temperatures in a home well below 0 degrees. Smart. The food, fruits, meats, cheeses, about all I had left were covered in at least an inch of that clear, perfect ice. Almost like glass containers. I would spend hours chipping away at it, then stuffing the remains in my mouth, hoping I could survive just a little longer on the scraps. Yesterday, my entire upstairs became covered in the ice. I can't even reach my fridge, much less my door. I gave up hope on human contact days ago. In the basement, I fled, knowing I couldn't avoid it anymore. And finally, we've come to today. It's coating the stairs, and the walls around me are closing in with ice. I stopped shivering long ago. Even my body realized that it's over. My bodily systems and organs shutting down one by one. So here I am, trapped in the last bit of my home, my world, not covered in that cold, transparent killer. I'm huddled into the fetal position, retelling the story again and again to myself. The ice is only a few inches away. I never thought about it, but I've not actually watched the ice grow. It's just covering more space every time I check. I look down and see the ice at my toes. Clever. While I was busy thinking of the ice never moving, it moves. I'm fading in and out of consciousness, and every time I awake, I slip more and more into the cold embrace of death. I laugh mildly in my head at my ironic statement. My legs are now enveloped in the ice. At least there's no more running. No more trying to survive. I'm trying to smile, but the muscles in my face won't respond. The ice is now over my stomach and around my arms. I take solace in the fact that my eyes, and more so my mind, will be the last to go. Now it's up to my chin. With the final movements of my eyes, I glance around at my glass coffin. So this is how it ends. My eyes fall back, looking straight ahead. No longer do I feel anything. The ice must be everywhere now. I'm suddenly remembering the time I sent a kid to the hospital in a 2-week coma. I pray to God that was enough for St. Peter to reject my application into heaven. I hear hell is much warmer. Hopefully that hasn't frozen over too.